The snow fell thick and heavy through the pine trees, each flake catching what little moonlight broke through the storm clouds above. Elena Mirovna ran through the darkness, her breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps that clouded the frozen air before her face. Blood soaked through the left side of her wool coat, warm against her ribs, then cooling, then freezing in the brutal cold of the Sierra Nevada winter. Behind her, perhaps 50 yards back through the trees, she heard him calling her name. "Elena, you can't run from what you did." His voice carried on the wind, equal parts fury and something else. Something that might have been grief if she didn't know better. If she hadn't learned that men like him wore emotions the way other men wore masks, changing them to suit their needs. Her foot caught on a snow-covered root, and she went down hard, her palms sinking into powder that hid the rocky ground beneath. Pain shot through her wrists. The cold bit into her exposed skin like teeth. She scrambled forward on hands and knees, knowing that stopping meant dying, that the man behind her would not hesitate when he found her. A gunshot cracked through the forest. The bullet struck a tree trunk 3 feet to her left, sending splinters of frozen bark into the air. She forced herself upright and kept running, kept moving, even as her vision began to blur at the edges and warmth spread down her side in a way that told her the bleeding had not stopped. The moonlight caught on something ahead. A clearing, open space where the trees fell away and the land dropped toward the valley below. She could see lights in the distance, the town of Placerville spread out like scattered embers in the darkness, so close, too far. She turned back once, just once, and saw his silhouette emerging from between the pines, tall, steady, raising the gun again. Elena Mirovna closed her eyes and thought about the choices that had brought her here, to this moment, to this ending she had always known was coming, but had desperately hoped to avoid. Then the screen of her memory went dark, pulled backward in time, like a curtain yanked aside to reveal what came before. 6 weeks earlier, Sacramento burned under an autumn sun that seemed to have forgotten winter was coming. The train station bustled with the controlled chaos of a Monday morning, passengers arriving and departing, porters hauling luggage, vendors calling out the price of newspapers and roasted chestnuts. Elena stood apart from the crowd, one hand pressed against the worn leather of her traveling bag, the other clutching a yellowed envelope that had been slipped under her boarding house door 3 nights prior. She had not slept since receiving it, could not sleep knowing what the envelope contained and what it meant. The letter inside was brief. No greeting, no signature, just an address in Placerville, a date, and a single line written in a hand that tried to appear feminine but failed. The letters were too precise, too controlled, formed by someone who had been taught penmanship as a discipline rather than an art. "Come alone or don't come at all, but know that if you run, we will find you wherever you go." Beneath the letter, tucked into the envelope like an afterthought, was a train ticket. One way. Non-refundable. Departure time circled in red ink. Elena had tried to convince herself it was a bluff, that whoever had sent the envelope was simply trying to frighten her, to make her panic and expose herself. She had survived 5 years by being careful, by moving often, by never staying anywhere long enough for her past to catch up with her present. She had changed her name twice, her appearance 3 times, learned to blend into the great anonymous mass of women who had come west seeking something better than what they had left behind. But the envelope proved someone new. Someone had found her despite all her precautions, and that someone wanted her in Placerville. The train whistle blew sharp and insistent. Elena picked up her bag and walked toward the platform, each step feeling like a small surrender. She told herself she was choosing to go, that this was her decision, but the weight of the envelope in her pocket reminded her that choice was an illusion. She had stopped having choices the moment she struck the match in Philadelphia 5 years ago. The passenger car was half full, mostly men in dark suits, reading newspapers or smoking cigars, a few women traveling in pairs or with children. Elena found a seat near the back, away from the windows, where she could watch the other passengers without being easily observed herself. Old habits, survival instincts that had kept her alive this long and would not be easily abandoned. As the train pulled away from Sacramento and began its climb into the foothills, Elena removed her gloves and examined her hands. The scars were faint now, barely visible unless you knew to look for them, thin white lines across her palms and the inside of her wrists where burning timber had fallen, and she had tried to lift it, tried to move it before someone had pulled her away from the flames. The scars were the least of what the fire had marked on her. The real damage was deeper hidden beneath skin and bone, written in the memories that still woke her in the dark hours before dawn. She pulled the gloves back on and turned her attention to the window, watching the landscape change from flat valley to rolling hills to the first steep rise of mountains. The other passengers dozed or talked quietly among themselves. No one paid her any attention. She was just another woman traveling alone, unremarkable, forgettable. Exactly as she needed to be. The train reached Placerville late in the afternoon, pulling into a station that was little more than a covered platform and a small building that served as both ticket office and freight depot. Elena was the only passenger to disembark. The others continued on toward the higher elevations, toward the silver mines and timber camps that still drew men who believed the West held fortunes waiting to be claimed. She stood on the platform with her bag at her feet and surveyed the town spread before her. Placerville had the look of a place trying to decide what it wanted to become. Some buildings were new construction, fresh lumber, and glass windows, evidence of mining money and optimism. Others were older, weathered by decades of mountain storms, relics of the gold rush days when this place had been called Hangtown and justice had been swift and brutal. A bitter wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the smell of pine smoke and coming snow. Elena pulled her coat tighter and scanned the street for whoever was supposed to meet her. The letter had been vague on details, offering only the assurance that someone would know when she arrived. "Miss Mirovna?" The voice came from her left, masculine and measured. She turned to find a man standing in the shadow of the station building, tall and lean, dressed in dark wool, and wearing a hat that shadowed his features. He made no move to approach, simply stood watching her with the stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. Elena's hand moved instinctively to the pocket of her coat, where she kept a small pistol, a Derringer, that held only 2 shots, but had served her well in the past. The man noticed the movement and raised his hand slowly, palms out, showing he meant no immediate threat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice carried an accent she couldn't quite place, something educated and Eastern overlaid with the flatter tones of someone who had spent time on the frontier. "I'm just as surprised to see you as you probably are to be here." "Who are you?" Elena asked. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears, too loud in the quiet afternoon. The man stepped forward into the light. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps 35, with dark hair showing the first threads of gray at the temples and eyes that held the particular weariness of someone who had seen too much and forgotten too little. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, marked by a thin scar that ran from his right eyebrow to his cheekbone. "Gideon Cross," he said. "I manage the Cross Ranch about 5 miles north of town, and I think there's been some kind of mistake." Elena felt her pulse quicken. The name meant nothing to her, but the word ranch triggered a memory of the letter she had received weeks ago before the threatening envelope. A different letter, official and formal, from someone calling himself Marcus Dalton, asking if she would consider traveling to California to become a bride to a rancher in need of a wife. She had ignored that letter, thrown it in the fire without responding. She had no interest in becoming any man's mail-order bride, no matter how desperate her circumstances became. "I didn't come here to marry anyone," Elena said carefully. "I came because someone told me I had no choice." Gideon's expression shifted, something dark moving behind his eyes. "Who sent you the letter? It wasn't signed, but it mentioned a name, Marcus Dalton." The change in Gideon was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face, and his hands, still raised in that placating gesture, curled slowly into fists. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus Dalton is dead. He's been dead for 3 months." The wind picked up swirling dust and dry leaves across the platform between them. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the same vertiginous sensation she had experienced in Philadelphia, when she realized the fire was spreading faster than anyone could control, that the choices she had made could not be unmade. "That's not possible," she said. "I received a letter from him just 2 months ago." "Then someone is using a dead man's name." Gideon lowered his hands and took a step closer, his expression grim. And they knew enough about Dalton's plans to forge a convincing letter. Did he ask you to come here to marry him? Elena nodded slowly. But I never responded. I never agreed to come. Yet here you are. Because 3 days ago someone slipped a different letter under my door. Someone who knew my real name. Someone who knew about Philadelphia. She had not meant to say that last part had promised herself she would reveal nothing but the fear and exhaustion of 3 sleepless nights, and the shock of learning Marcus Dalton was dead had loosened her tongue. Gideon studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth written there. You're running from something, he said. It was not a question. Everyone in the West is running from something, Elena replied. Fair enough. Gideon glanced over his shoulder toward the town, then back at Elena. You can't stay here in Placerville. Not tonight. Why not? Because 3 women have died in this town in the last 2 months, all of them foreigners, all of them alone, and the killer hasn't been caught. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Elena felt her chest tighten, her breath coming shallow and quick. She had escaped one danger only to walk directly into another. Who were they, she asked. 2 Chinese women who worked in the laundries, a Mexican woman who cleaned houses. The sheriff says it's probably some drifter passing through, but people are scared. And scared people do stupid things to anyone who looks like they don't belong. Elena understood what he was not saying, that she, with her slight accent and her foreignness written in the angles of her face and the darkness of her hair, would be seen as a potential victim, or worse, as a potential suspect. Where do you suggest I go? She asked. Gideon was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with something that might have been concern. Come to the ranch, at least for tonight. We'll figure out who sent you here and why, and we'll keep you safe until we have answers. Elena wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust this stranger, not to put herself in the power of a man she didn't know, in a place where no one would hear her scream. But the alternative was staying in a town where women were dying, and she fit the profile of the next victim. She picked up her bag and nodded once. Gideon took the bag from her without asking, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he understood she might bolt at any moment. He led her to a wagon hitched to 2 horses, helped her onto the bench seat with a hand under her elbow, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode through town in silence. Elena watched the buildings pass, the stores and saloons and boarding houses, the people on the sidewalks who stopped their conversations to stare at the stranger in Gideon Cross's wagon. She felt their eyes on her like physical weight, measuring, judging, wondering. At the edge of town they passed the sheriff's office. A man stood on the porch, older and heavy-set, with a silver star pinned to his vest. He raised a hand in greeting as they passed. Gideon returned the gesture, but did not stop. That's Sheriff Hayes, Gideon said. Good man, honest. But he's in over his head with these murders. Does he have any suspects? If he does, he's not sharing. People are starting to wonder if it's someone local, someone they know. The road climbed steadily as they left Placerville, behind winding through forests of pine and oak, following a creek that ran silver and clear over smooth stones. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for a world where women were murdered and dead men sent letters. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley where the creek widened into a small pond. The main house was 2 stories built of logs and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A barn stood nearby, painted red by someone who had cared enough about tradition to bring color to the wilderness. Corrals held a dozen horses that lifted their heads to watch the wagon approach. It was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way, the kind of place that demanded strength from the people who lived there but offered peace in return. Gideon pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Elena down. She stood for a moment, breathing in the cold mountain air, feeling the exhaustion of travel and fear settle into her bones. The house is bigger than I need, Gideon said, carrying her bag up the porch steps. You can have the room upstairs, second door on the right. There's a lock on the inside if you want to use it. The fact that he mentioned the lock, that he understood she might need that security, made Elena trust him slightly more than she had a moment before. Inside the house was sparse but well maintained. The main room held a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, a table with 4 chairs. Everything was clean but impersonal, as if whoever lived here had stopped caring about making it feel like home. Gideon led her upstairs to a room that held a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over the valley toward the mountains beyond. The setting sun painted everything gold and shadow. "I'll make dinner in an hour," Gideon said from the doorway. "Come down when you're ready, or don't. I'll leave a plate for you either way." He started to leave, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I know you don't have any reason to trust me," he said, "but I want you to know that whatever you're running from, whatever brought you here, you're safe tonight. I give you my word on that." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, leaving Elena alone in the room as darkness gathered outside the window. She did not unpack, did not relax, simply sat on the edge of the bed with her derringer in her lap and watched the shadows lengthen across the floor, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her and the distant call of an owl hunting in the forest. She had come to Placerville expecting a trap. She had found one, though not the kind she had anticipated. And somewhere in the darkness, someone who knew her secrets was watching, waiting, planning their next move. Elena had survived 5 years by being smarter than the people who hunted her, by being faster, more ruthless, more willing to do what was necessary to stay alive. She would need all of that and more to survive what was coming. An hour later, the smell of cooking meat and coffee drew her downstairs despite her better judgment. She found Gideon in the kitchen, working at a cast-iron stove with the competent movements of someone accustomed to taking care of himself. He had removed his hat and coat. In the lamplight, she could see the scar on his face more clearly, and another that disappeared beneath his collar, suggesting a history of violence endured, if not inflicted. "Venison stew," he said without turning around, "and biscuits that are probably terrible, but they're hot." Elena sat at the small table in the corner and watched him work. The kitchen was warm from the stove, the windows fogged with steam. It felt almost normal, almost safe, which made her more nervous than if he had been openly threatening. When he served the food, it was better than he had claimed. They ate in silence for several minutes before Gideon finally spoke. "The ranch belonged to Marcus Dalton," he said. "He died 3 months ago. Officially, it was an accident, a fall from his horse. But I found the body, and I don't think it was an accident." Elena set down her spoon. "Why not?" "Because Marcus was the best horseman I ever knew, and because he had been asking questions about women disappearing, about a network of men who promised immigrant women jobs or husbands, then sold them to brothels or worse." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. "You think Marcus was killed for investigating?" she asked. "I think Marcus discovered something that got him killed, and I think whoever killed him is still operating, still taking women, still profiting from their desperation. And you think I was sent here as part of that?" Gideon met her eyes across the table. "I think someone used Marcus's name to lure you here. The question is, why you specifically? What makes you valuable to them?" Elena could have lied, should have lied. But something in Gideon's face, in the way he spoke about Marcus and the missing women, made her believe he might actually want to help. "5 years ago, I worked as a nurse in Philadelphia," she said slowly. "There was a fire at the hospital where I worked. 12 people died. They blamed me, said I had been careless with a lamp near the medicine storage. I ran before they could arrest me." "Did you do it?" Gideon asked. His tone was neutral, neither accusing nor absolving. Elena looked down at her hands, at the scars she usually kept hidden beneath gloves. "I lit the fire, but it wasn't an accident." The admission hung in the air between them. Gideon did not react with shock or horror. He simply nodded as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. "The 12 people who died," he said. "Were they innocent?" "No." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "They were part of a ring that trafficked women through the hospital. Promised them medical care, then sold them when they were most vulnerable. I tried to expose them through proper channels. No one believed me. So I found another way." "You burned them out." "I burned them alive." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and moaning through the eaves. Elena waited for Gideon to tell her to leave, to refuse to shelter a murderer, to hand her over to the authorities. Instead, he stood and refilled her coffee cup, then his own, and sat back down across from her. "There are worse things than killing people who deserve it," he said quietly. "I learned that in the war. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are miles apart." "You were in the war?" Elena asked. "Field surgeon for 3 years. Saw enough death to last several lifetimes. Saw enough men die for causes they didn't understand that I stopped believing much in the righteousness of either side." He paused, staring into his coffee. "When it was over, I came west, tried to find some peace, tried to forget. Have you found the peace or done the forgetting? Either?" Gideon smiled, a brief, bitter expression. "No to both. The past doesn't let go that easily, does it?" Before Elena could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Then a knock at the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house. Gideon stood quickly, his hand moving to a revolver that hung on a peg by the door. Elena rose as well, her own hand finding the derringer in her pocket. The knock came again. Gideon moved to the door and called through the wood. "Who's there?" "Sheriff Hayes. Need to talk to you, Gideon. It's urgent." Gideon glanced back at Elena, a question in his eyes. She nodded once. He opened the door. The sheriff stood on the porch, his face grim in the lamplight. Behind him, Elena could see 2 other men on horseback, deputies, perhaps waiting in the darkness. "Sorry to bother you this late," Hayes said, "but we've got a situation. Found another body this afternoon. Woman named May Lynn worked at the Pearl Dragon Saloon. She's been dead about 2 days." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Another victim, another woman who fit the pattern. "Where did you find her?" Gideon asked. "That's the thing." Hayes shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "We found her in the woods between here and town, not far from your property line, and someone saw her heading this direction 2 days ago, said she was asking about Marcus Dalton." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Marcus has been dead for months." "I know. Which makes it strange that she was looking for him, doesn't it?" Hayes's eyes moved past Gideon to Elena. "And who might this be?" "Guest," Gideon said flatly. "Arrived today on the train from Sacramento." "That's so." Hayes studied Elena with the measured gaze of a man trained to notice details. "Mind if I ask your name, Miss?" Elena stepped forward, keeping her expression neutral. "Elena Mirovna. I'm here visiting Mr. Cross." "Visiting from where?" "San Francisco." "Uh-huh." Hayes pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Thing is, we found something in May Lynn's possession. A letter. Same handwriting as letters found on the other 2 victims. All of them got letters promising them work or marriage. All of them ended up dead." He unfolded the paper and held it up so they could see. Even from several feet away, Elena recognized the handwriting, the same precise, controlled script from the letter she had received. "We're thinking maybe there's a pattern here," Hayes continued. "Women getting lured to Placerville with false promises. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe Marcus Dalton's death wasn't so accidental after all, if maybe he discovered what was happening and got killed for it." "Marcus was a good man," Gideon said. "If he knew about this, he would have stopped it." "Maybe he tried." Hayes folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. "Point is, I need to ask you some questions, Gideon, and I need to search the ranch, just to eliminate you as a suspect." The words hung heavy in the cold night air. Elena saw the tension in Gideon's shoulders, the way his hand stayed close to his revolver. This was the moment that would determine everything. If Gideon refused, Hayes would assume guilt. If he agreed, the sheriff might find something that exposed secrets better left buried. "Come back tomorrow in daylight," Gideon said finally. "I've got nothing to hide, but I'm not having my property torn apart in the middle of the night." Hayes considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But I'll be back first thing in the morning, and, Miss Mirovna, I'd appreciate it if you stayed in town where I can reach you, just in case I have questions." "She's staying here," Gideon said firmly. "It's not safe for a woman alone in Placerville right now. You said so yourself." The sheriff's expression hardened. "That's exactly why I want her somewhere I can keep an eye on her. For her own protection, of course." "Of course." Gideon's tone made it clear he understood the implied threat. "But she's my guest and she's staying here. You want to talk to her, you know where to find us." For a moment, Elena thought Hayes would push the issue, would insist, or even try to force her to come with him. But then he stepped back, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was more warning than courtesy. "Get some rest, both of you. I'll see you in the morning." He walked back to his horse and mounted, with the stiff movements of a man whose joints ached in the cold. The deputies followed him down the road toward town, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness, until they disappeared around a bend. Gideon closed the door and locked it, then stood there for a long moment with his hand on the wood, his head bowed. "This is worse than I thought," he said quietly. "He suspects you," Elena said. "He suspects everyone. But yes, I'm at the top of his list." Gideon turned to face her. "And now you are too. Coming here today of all days with a woman just murdered nearby, and that letter connecting you to the others." Elena's mind raced through the implications. Someone had orchestrated this perfectly, sent her the threatening letter, timed her arrival, killed Maylin, in a location that would point suspicion toward Gideon's ranch. Every piece carefully placed to create a trap that was only now becoming visible. "We need to find out who's behind this," she said. "We? You said Marcus died investigating this. You think I'm going to sit quietly while someone tries to frame me for murders I didn't commit?" Elena moved closer to Gideon, her voice low and intense. "I've spent 5 years running from one fire. I'm not running from another." Gideon studied her face, seeming to find something there that satisfied him. "Then we work together. Figure out who killed Marcus and these women, and why they wanted you here." "Agreed." Elena offered her hand. After a moment, Gideon shook it, his grip firm and warm. They stood like that for a moment, two people bound by circumstance and mutual danger, making a pact that would likely get them both killed. Then Elena released his hand and stepped back. "I should sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult." "Wait." Gideon moved to the desk in the corner and opened a drawer. He pulled out a knife in a leather sheath and held it out to her. "Take this, just in case." Elena took the knife, feeling its weight, noting the worn handle that suggested frequent use. "In case of what?" "In case I'm wrong about being able to protect you. In case whoever is behind this comes in the night. In case you need to protect yourself from me." The honesty of that last statement, the acknowledgement that she had no real reason to trust him, made Elena respect him more than any reassurance could have. "Thank you," she said. She went upstairs to her room, locked the door, and placed a chair under the handle for extra security. Then she sat on the bed with the knife and her derringer beside her, listening to the house settle into nighttime quiet. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound made her tense, every creak of wood or gust of wind set her pulse racing. She found herself thinking about Philadelphia, about the fire, about the screams and the smell of burning flesh, and the terrible knowledge that she had killed 12 people, even if they had deserved it. She thought about the letter that had brought her here, about Marcus Dalton and the women who had died. About the pattern she was beginning to see, the shape of a conspiracy that reached further than a single town or a single murderer. And she thought about Gideon Cross, the scarred surgeon turned rancher, carrying his own guilt and his own ghosts, who had offered her shelter when he had every reason to turn her away. Somewhere deep in the night, Elena finally dozed, falling into uneasy dreams of fire and snow and faceless men who hunted women through the darkness. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the window and the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. She grabbed the knife and moved to the window, peering through the curtain. Sheriff Hayes and his deputies were dismounting in the yard, their faces grim, their hands on their weapons. Before Elena could react, she heard the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. Gideon went to the window and looked out, then swore under his breath. "It's Sheriff Hayes, and he's got half a dozen men with him." Elena joined him at the window. The sheriff and his deputies were dismounting in the yard, their faces grim, their hands on their weapons. Hayes walked up to the porch and pounded on the door. "Gideon Cross, I need you to come out here." Gideon opened the door, keeping himself between Elena and the sheriff. "What's this about Hayes?" "Got a report this morning. A witness who saw a woman matching Miss Mirovna's description near where Maylin's body was found 2 days ago, before she claimed to arrive in Placerville." Elena felt the trap close around her. Someone had planned this, perfectly created false witnesses, constructed an alibi that would make her look guilty. "That's impossible," Gideon said. "She just arrived yesterday." "Then she won't mind coming with us to answer some questions." Hayes's hand rested on his revolver. "Miss Mirovna, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder." The world seemed to slow down. Elena saw Gideon tense, saw the deputies spread out to surround the house, saw the morning sun glinting off gun barrels and badge metal. She could run, could try to fight her way free, could do what she had done in Philadelphia and disappear into the wilderness before they could stop her. But running would only confirm her guilt. And something in her, some part that had grown tired of fleeing, that wanted to stand and fight for once, made her step forward. "I'll come," she said. "But I didn't kill anyone, and I can prove it." It was a lie. She had no proof. But she had survived this long by being clever, and she would need every ounce of cleverness she possessed to survive what came next. As the sheriff led her toward his horse, as Gideon watched with helpless fury from the porch, Elena looked back once at the ranch at the mountains, rising behind it at the vast indifferent sky. Somewhere out there the real killer was watching, laughing, believing he had won. But Elena Mirovna had burned 12 people alive in Philadelphia and walked away. She had survived 5 years on the run with half the eastern seaboard looking for her, and she would survive this too. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, the trap had closed, but the hunter had underestimated his prey, and that mistake would be his last. The ride to town passed in silence. Elena sat in the back of Sheriff Hayes's wagon, hands bound, watching Placerville grow larger as they descended from the foothills. Citizens stopped on the sidewalks to stare. Some pointed. Others whispered behind their hands. The jail was a small stone building behind the courthouse. Hayes helped her down from the wagon with surprising gentleness. "I'm sorry about this," he said quietly, "but with a witness placing you at the scene, I don't have a choice." "I understand." Elena's voice was steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "You're just doing your job." The cell door clanged shut with a finality that echoed in her bones. Elena sat on the narrow cot and stared at the barred window, watching the last light of day fade into darkness. She had escaped one trap in Philadelphia, only to walk directly into another in California. But she was not dead yet. And as long as she drew breath, there was still a chance to fight back. The jail cell in Placerville was smaller than Elena had expected, barely 8 feet square, with a cot bolted to the wall and a single barred window that let in the pale morning light. Sheriff Hayes had been almost apologetic as he locked her inside, explaining that it was for her own safety as much as anything else that the town was frightened, and frightened people needed someone to blame. Elena had not argued, had not protested her innocence beyond that single statement on Gideon's porch. She understood that words meant nothing here, that only evidence would save her, and evidence was something she would need to find herself. She sat on the cot and reviewed what she knew. 3 women dead, all foreigners, all alone. A 4th victim, May Lynn, found near Gideon's ranch with a letter in her possession. Letters that matched the one Elena had received, all written in that same controlled, precise hand. And now a witness claiming to have seen Elena near the murder scene 2 days before she had supposedly arrived in town. Someone was constructing a case against her piece by piece. Someone who knew enough about her past to threaten her enough about the trafficking network to use it as bait, and enough about murder to make it look like the work of a single killer. The question was who, and why Elena specifically, when there were easier targets, women with less reason to run, less ability to fight back. She was still turning these thoughts over when she heard footsteps in the outer office, followed by raised voices. One belonged to Sheriff Hayes. The other was female, sharp with urgency. "I need to see her, now." "Ma'am, I can't just let anyone back there." "I'm not anyone. I'm a nurse, and I have information about the murders." Elena stood and moved to the cell door, pressing her face against the bars to see into the outer office. A woman stood arguing with the sheriff, dark-haired and slim, wearing a simple dress and carrying a medical bag. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of tired beauty that came from working too hard and sleeping too little. Sheriff Hayes was shaking his head. "If you have information, you can tell me, and I'll pass it along." "No." The woman's voice was firm. "What I have to say, I need to say to her directly. It's important." There was something in her tone, some urgency that went beyond civic duty, that made Hayes hesitate. He glanced back toward the cells, toward Elena, then sighed in resignation. 5 minutes, and I'm staying within earshot. The woman nodded and walked past him into the cell area. As she came closer, Elena could see the fear in her eyes barely contained beneath a mask of professional composure. This was someone operating at the edge of courage, forcing herself forward despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "Miss Mirovna," the woman said quietly, "my name is Helena Cross." The name hit Elena like cold water. Helena. The woman Gideon had mentioned, the one Nathaniel had beaten, the one who had supposedly been abandoned 2 years ago when Nathaniel disappeared. Except Nathaniel was not dead. Nathaniel had returned very much alive just that morning. "Mrs. Cross," Elena said carefully, "what can I do for you?" Helena glanced over her shoulder to make sure the sheriff was out of immediate earshot, then moved closer to the bars, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "You need to get out of here. Tonight, whatever it takes, because if you stay in this jail, you're going to end up like the others." The other victims weren't in jail when they died. No, but they were all under someone's control, all isolated, all in a position where no one would question their disappearance until it was too late. Helena's hands gripped the bars, her knuckles white. "I know who's killing these women, and I know you're next on his list." Elena felt her pulse quicken. "Who?" But before Helena could answer, Sheriff Hayes called out from the front office. "Time's up, Mrs. Cross." Helena's expression turned desperate. She reached through the bars and pressed something small and cold into Elena's hand, closing Elena's fingers around it. "Don't trust anyone," Helena whispered. "Not the sheriff, not Gideon, no one. The killer has friends in this town, people who protect him." Then she stepped back, raising her voice to a normal volume. "I hope you feel better soon, Miss Mirovna. That tonic should help with the headache." She walked away quickly, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Elena waited until she heard the outer door close before opening her hand to see what Helena had given her. It was a key, small and brass, the kind that might open a drawer or a lockbox. And wrapped around it was a tiny scrap of paper with an address written in hasty script: Mercy Street, the clinic, midnight. Elena closed her hand around the key and sat back down on the cot, her mind racing. Helena knew something dangerous enough that she could not say it openly, even to a woman facing murder charges. Something that required a secret meeting in the middle of the night. Which meant Elena needed to escape, needed to get out of this cell and find out what Helena knew before the killer made his next move. The problem was that escaping from a jail cell was considerably harder than escaping from a hospital or a boarding house. The bars were solid iron, the lock was good quality, and Sheriff Hayes kept the keys on his belt at all times, unless she could convince him to open the door voluntarily. Elena spent the rest of the day cultivating a performance. She paced the cell, growing visibly more agitated as the hours passed. She complained of chest pains, of difficulty breathing, of a headache that was getting worse. By evening, when the deputy brought her dinner, she could barely stand upright. "I need a doctor," she gasped, clutching at her chest. "Please, something is wrong." The deputy, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, shifted nervously. "Sheriff says you're not to leave the cell except for necessities." "This is a necessity." Elena let herself collapse onto the cot, breathing in short, sharp gasps that were only partially faked. The stress of the day, the lack of sleep, the constant fear, all contributed to a genuine sense of physical distress that made the performance convincing. "I think it's my heart." The deputy hurried to the front office. Elena could hear him talking urgently to Sheriff Hayes, hear the sheriff's reluctant agreement. 5 minutes later, Hayes himself appeared at her cell door, medical bag in hand. "Deputy says you're having chest pains." "Yes." Elena's voice was weak, thready. "Hard to breathe. Started this afternoon." Hayes unlocked the cell and entered cautiously, keeping one hand on his revolver. "Let me take a look." As he leaned over, her stethoscope in hand, Elena made her move. She grabbed his wrist and twisted, using his own momentum to pull him off balance. Her other hand went for the revolver, but Hayes was faster than she had anticipated, stronger. They struggled for a moment, his greater strength against her desperation, and then his fist connected with her jaw and she went down hard, stars exploding across her vision. When her head cleared, she was back on the cot, and Hayes was standing outside the locked cell, breathing hard, his face a mixture of anger and disappointment. "That was foolish, Miss Mirovna, real foolish." Elena tasted blood in her mouth where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. She had failed, had blown her one chance at escape, and now Hayes would be watching her even more carefully. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm scared. I didn't kill those women, and I'm scared that no one will believe me." Hayes studied her for a long moment. Some of the anger faded from his face, replaced by something that might have been sympathy. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm not entirely convinced you're guilty. The evidence is circumstantial at best, but I've got a town full of frightened people demanding I do something, and you're the only suspect I've got." He paused. "If you are innocent, the truth will come out. I promise you that." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her failure and the approaching darkness. She lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, feeling the bruise forming on her jaw, tasting blood and defeat. The key Helena had given her was still hidden in her boot. But what good was a key when she could not get past the cell door? Hours passed. The sun set. The jail grew dark except for a single lamp burning in the outer office where the night deputy sat reading a newspaper. Elena could hear his occasional cough, the rustle of pages turning the creak of his chair. Then, around 11 o'clock, she heard voices at the front door. The deputy greeting someone. A brief conversation she could not quite make out. Then footsteps approaching the cell area. Gideon Cross stepped into view carrying a covered basket that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. "Brought dinner for the prisoner," he said to the deputy. "Sheriff said it was all right." The deputy hesitated, clearly unsure. "He didn't mention anything to me. Check with him if you want. I'll wait." Gideon's voice was casual, unconcerned. "Though the coffee's going to get cold." The deputy wavered, then nodded. "All right, but make it quick." He returned to the front office, leaving Gideon and Elena alone. Gideon moved close to the bars, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Helena came to see me this afternoon, told me she'd contacted you, said you needed to get to the clinic tonight." "I can't get out of here," Elena said quietly. "I tried, failed." "I know, Hayes told me." Gideon glanced toward the front office. "But I have another idea. The deputy is young, inexperienced, and I brought more than just food." He reached into the basket and pulled out a small brown bottle, holding it so Elena could see the label. Laudanum, a powerful opiate that doctors used for pain relief and which, in sufficient doses, would render a person unconscious for hours. "In his coffee," Gideon whispered. "Enough to put him to sleep, but not enough to hurt him. Give it 15 minutes, then take his keys and go to the clinic. I'll be waiting outside with horses." "Why are you doing this?" Elena asked. "You barely know me. If we're caught, you'll go to prison too." Gideon's expression was serious in the lamplight, his eyes shadowed but intent. "Because Helena is terrified. I've never seen her scared like this, not even when Nathaniel was at his worst, and because someone killed Marcus for trying to expose this network. If we don't stop whoever is behind it, more women are going to die." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I believe you. About Philadelphia. About doing what needed to be done when the law failed. Sometimes the only justice available is the kind we make ourselves." The deputy called from the front office. "Time's up, Cross." Gideon handed the basket through the bars. "Eat something. Keep your strength up." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the night. Elena waited until she could no longer hear any sound from the outer office, then carefully uncovered the basket. Bread, cheese, an apple. And a small tin cup of coffee that was meant for her but which she would need to share with the deputy. She called out to him. "Deputy, Mr. Cross brought coffee, more than I can drink. Would you like some?" There was a pause, then the young man appeared, eyeing her warily. "That's some kind of trick?" "No trick, just good coffee going to waste." "Seems a shame." He considered this, then shrugged. "I suppose it'd be all right. Long night ahead." Elena poured half the coffee into the second cup Gideon had thoughtfully included and passed it through the bars. The deputy took it, sniffed it suspiciously, then took a sip. "That's good coffee," he admitted. "Better than what we usually get. Mr. Cross seems like a thoughtful man." They talked for a few minutes, casual conversation about nothing important. The deputy finished his coffee and returned to the front office. Elena sat on her cot and counted the minutes, watching through the bars as the laudanum began to take effect. 10 minutes. The deputy yawned, rubbed his eyes. 12 minutes. His head began to nod forward, catching himself fighting the drowsiness. 15 minutes. He slumped in his chair, the newspaper sliding from his lap to the floor. Elena waited another 2 minutes to be certain, then moved quietly to the cell door. She could not reach the deputy from here, could not get to his keys while she was locked inside. But Gideon had thought of that too. On the floor just outside her cell, partially hidden under a loose board, was a long piece of wire with a hook bent into one end. She used it to snag the deputy's belt, pulling slowly and carefully until she could reach the ring of keys. Her hands shook as she tried each one in the cell door lock. The third key turned with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silent jail. Elena eased the door open and stepped into the corridor, every nerve screaming at her to run to get out before someone discovered what she was doing. But she forced herself to move slowly, quietly, checking to make sure the deputy was truly asleep before taking his coat from the rack and slipping it on over her dress. It was too large, but it would help her blend into the shadows. The front door was unlocked. She eased it open and stepped out into the cold night air, breathing in the scent of pine smoke and approaching snow. The street was empty, most of the town already asleep, only a few lights burning in the saloons at the far end of the main road. Gideon emerged from the shadows, leading 2 horses, both saddled and ready. He handed Elena the reins of a gentle-looking mare. "Can you ride?" "Well enough." Elena mounted with some difficulty, hampered by her skirts and the unfamiliarity of Western saddles. "Where's the clinic?" "Mercy Street, 3 blocks north, but we should approach from the back. Less chance of being seen." They rode through the darkness, keeping to the alleys and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Placerville was laid out in a rough grid buildings clustered around the central street, with residential areas spreading outward toward the surrounding forest. The clinic was in one of the newer structures, a 2-story building that served as both medical office and residence for Helena Cross. Gideon led them to a small stable behind the clinic where they could leave the horses out of sight. A lamp burned in one of the upstairs windows, a signal that Helena was waiting. The back door opened before they could knock. Helena stood in the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight, one hand pressed against her chest as if to calm her racing heart. "Thank God," she whispered. "I was afraid you wouldn't make it." She ushered them inside quickly, locking the door behind them and pulling the curtains closed over every window. The clinic's main room was clean and orderly, lined with shelves holding medical supplies and instruments. A desk in the corner held patient records and correspondence. Everything spoke of a competent, careful practice run by someone who took their work seriously. But there was also an air of fear in the room, a tension that had nothing to do with the illicit meeting taking place. Elena could see it in the way Helena moved, constantly checking the windows, her hands trembling as she lit additional lamps. "You said you know who the killer is," Elena said without preamble. "Tell us." Helena sank into the chair behind her desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Dr. Samuel Garrett, the town physician. He's been killing these women for months, maybe longer." Gideon went very still. "Samuel, that's impossible. He's one of the most respected men in Placerville." "Which is exactly why no one suspects him." Helena's voice was bitter. "Who questions the doctor, who doubts the man who delivers their babies and sets their broken bones and sits with their dying relatives?" "How do you know it's him?" Elena asked. Helena stood and went to a locked cabinet in the corner. She used a key from around her neck to open it, then pulled out a leather-bound journal and several loose papers covered in meticulous handwriting. "Because I've been his assistant for 2 years, and I've seen things I didn't understand at first, things I told myself had innocent explanations." She spread the papers on the desk. Patient records for women who came to the clinic seeking help. Immigrant women mostly. Women who had been promised work or marriage and found themselves trapped. Dr. Garrett would examine them, offer them medicine, tell them he could help. And then, Gideon's voice was tight, and then they would disappear, one by one. I thought maybe they had just moved on, found work elsewhere. But 3 months ago, I found this. Helena opened the journal to a marked page. Dr. Garrett keeps detailed records, not just medical notes, descriptions, measurements, valuations, like livestock. Elena took the journal and read the entries, feeling her stomach turn. The doctor had indeed cataloged his patients like animals for sale, noting their age, health, appearance, whether they spoke English, whether they had family looking for them, and beside each entry was a notation: sold, price received, buyer identified only by initials. He's not just killing them, Elena said quietly. He's selling them. The ones who are compliant, useful, and killing the ones who resist or who know too much. That's what Marcus Dalton discovered, Helena said. He came to me 6 months ago with questions about women who had vanished. I didn't tell him anything then because I was too afraid. But Marcus kept investigating, and then one night he came to the clinic in secret. Said he had evidence that Dr. Garrett was part of a larger network. Said he was going to the Marshal in Sacramento. But he never made it, Gideon said. No, he died that same night. Thrown from his horse, the official story said, but I saw the body when they brought it to the clinic. The injuries were wrong, not consistent with a fall. More like he'd been beaten and then placed on the road to make it look like an accident. Elena thought about the scalpel wound on Mei Lin's body, the precision of it, the knowledge of anatomy it required. The other victims. How were they killed? Stabbed. Always a single wound to the heart or the major vessels. Quick, efficient. The kind of cut a surgeon would make. Helena's voice broke slightly. I should have said something sooner, should have gone to the sheriff, but I was terrified, because Dr. Garrett isn't working alone. Who else? Gideon demanded. Helena met his eyes, and Elena saw the fear there deepen into something close to terror. Your brother, Nathaniel. He's the one who organized the whole network. Dr. Garrett finds the women and evaluates them. Nathaniel transports them and handles the sales. They've been working together for years. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in town. Gideon's face had gone pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Nathaniel is supposed to be dead, he said finally. You told me he died 2 years ago. You showed me the death certificate. I lied. Helena's voice was barely audible. I'm sorry, Gideon, but I had to protect myself. Nathaniel said if I ever told anyone he was alive, he would kill me. He said he had friends who would make it look like an accident, just like with Marcus. So you let me believe my brother was dead while he was out here trafficking women. The anger in Gideon's voice was cold and controlled, more frightening than if he had shouted. How could you keep that secret? Because I'm a coward. Tears streamed down Helena's face, now unchecked. Because Nathaniel beat me for 3 years, and I learned what happens to people who defy him. And because I thought if I just stayed quiet, just kept my head down, and didn't interfere, he would leave me alone. But he didn't leave you alone, Helena said. He made you write the letters. Helena's head jerked up, her eyes wide. How did you know? Because the handwriting on the letters sent to the victims is too controlled to be natural. It's someone trying to disguise their writing while still making it legible. Someone who was being forced to write under supervision. Helena nodded miserably. Dr. Garrett dictated what to write, said it was just to help find homes for women who needed them. I didn't realize what it really was until the murders started, and by then, if I had told anyone, I would have been implicated too, an accessory to murder. Helena understood the trap. Helena had been caught in the impossible position of wanting to do right while being paralyzed by fear and complicity. It was not so different from the doctors and nurses in Philadelphia who had known about the trafficking, but had said nothing, had looked away, had chosen their own safety over the lives of vulnerable women. Why did Nathaniel send for me specifically? Helena asked. Why target me when there are easier marks? Helena wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I don't know all the details, but 2 weeks ago, Nathaniel came to the clinic very excited about something. He said he'd found the perfect candidate. Someone with medical knowledge, someone who was already running from the law, someone who would be easy to frame if anything went wrong. Frame for what? For the murders. They knew the killings were attracting attention. Sheriff Hayes was asking questions, so they decided to bring in a scapegoat, someone whose guilt would be easy to sell. A foreign woman with a criminal past arriving in town just as another victim turned up dead. The cold logic of it made Elena's skin crawl. She had been selected not in spite of her past, but because of it. The fire in Philadelphia, the deaths, the years of running all of it, made her the perfect suspect for crimes she had not committed. But how did they know about me? Helena asked. How did Nathaniel find out about Philadelphia? I don't know, Helena admitted. But Nathaniel has contacts everywhere. People who owe him favors. People who traffic in information and secrets. If there was anything in your past that could be weaponized, he would have found it. Gideon, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke. Where is Nathaniel now? Where does he stay when he's in town? I don't know. He used to live at the ranch, but after you threw him out, he's been moving around. Sometimes at the hotel, sometimes sleeping in the clinic's storage room. Helena paused. But tonight he's supposed to meet with Dr. Garrett. They have a cabin in the woods outside town where they take the women before moving them. They're supposed to be there at midnight to discuss what to do about you. She looked at Elena. Nathaniel knows you escaped jail by now. The deputy was found unconscious an hour ago. They're going to accelerate their plans. Probably kill you tonight if they find you. Elena checked the small watch pinned to her dress. 11:45. How far is this cabin? About 3 miles northeast, up in the foothills. Helena stood and went to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. But you can't go there. It's suicide. Even if you have Gideon with you, you're outnumbered, Nathaniel and Doctor. Garrett, probably some of their associates. You wouldn't stand a chance. Then what do you suggest? Helena asked. We wait here for them to find us, run, and hope they don't catch up. I suggest you leave Placerville. Tonight. Ride as far as you can before dawn, and don't look back. I'll tell them I don't know where you went. It'll buy you some time. But even as Helena said it, Elena could see in her eyes that she knew it would not work. That Nathaniel and Doctor Garrett had resources and connections, that they would hunt Elena down wherever she went, that running would only delay the inevitable. Gideon seemed to reach the same conclusion. He moved to the cabinet where Helena had stored the journal and began examining its contents more closely. There's another option, he said quietly. We go to the cabin, but not to fight, to gather evidence. If we can find proof of what Nathaniel and Garrett have been doing, real evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away, we can take it to the authorities in Sacramento. Get federal marshals involved. The evidence is right here, Helena said, gesturing to the journal. Patient records, transactions, names. It's not enough. A defense lawyer would argue these are just medical notes, that the notations are innocent. We need something undeniable. Something that proves trafficking and murder beyond doubt. Elena understood what he was suggesting. You want to catch them in the act. Record them discussing the network. Maybe find where they're keeping current victims. Exactly. That's insane, Helena said. Even if you manage to get close to the cabin without being seen, what then? You can't just walk up and ask them to confess. No, Gideon agreed. But the cabin is old. Marcus told me about it once. Built during the gold rush with thin walls and gaps between the boards, if we approach carefully, we might be able to listen to their conversation, get them to incriminate themselves. It was risky, probably doomed to failure, but Elena had learned long ago that sometimes the only way forward was through the danger, not around it. I'm going, she said, with or without you. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we go together. Helena, you stay here. If we're not back by dawn, take the journal and get it to Sacramento. Tell them everything. Helena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She knew as well as they did that this was their only real chance. She went to a locked drawer and pulled out 2 items, a small revolver and a medical bag. She handed the gun to Elena. 6 shots, make them count. Then she gave the medical bag to Gideon. In case things go wrong, bandages, laudanum, surgical tools, you know how to use them. They prepared to leave, checking their weapons and supplies, when Helena suddenly grabbed Elena's arm. Wait, there's something else you need to know. She looked between Elena and Gideon, her expression tortured. About why Nathaniel is doing this, why he became the kind of man who could sell women like cattle. The war changed him, Gideon said. I know that already. It's more than that. Helena took a deep breath. Nathaniel is dying, has been for 2 years. Cancer probably in his lungs and liver. Dr. Garrett diagnosed him and told him he has maybe 6 months left. That's why Nathaniel came back, why he's been so desperate to make money. He's trying to secure his legacy, provide for the future before it's too late. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Elena saw Gideon sway slightly, his face draining of color. He's dying, yes, and it's made him even more ruthless, more willing to do terrible things because he believes he has nothing left to lose. Helena's voice broke. I'm sorry, Gideon. I know he's your brother, but he's also a monster, and monsters don't stop being dangerous just because they're dying. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow. Somewhere in the darkness, Nathaniel Cross and Dr. Samuel Garrett were gathering at their cabin, discussing their business of human misery, planning what to do about the woman who had escaped their carefully constructed trap. Gideon and Elena left through the back door, mounted their horses, and rode into the night. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. They both knew they were riding toward danger that might well kill them. But the alternative, doing nothing while more women died, was not something either of them could live with. The trail northeast was rough and narrow, winding through dense forest that blocked out the stars and turned the world into a maze of shadows. Gideon led the way, his horse picking carefully over roots and stones, following a path he seemed to know by memory. After perhaps 30 minutes, he reined in and dismounted, gesturing for Elena to do the same. "Cabin's just over that rise," he whispered. "We'll leave the horses here and go on foot. Stay behind me and step where I step. The forest is quiet this time of year. Any noise will carry." They tied the horses and proceeded on foot, moving slowly through the underbrush. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it could be heard for miles. Her hand stayed close to the revolver Helena had given her, her finger hovering near the trigger. The cabin came into view through the trees. It was small and crude, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. Light showed through gaps in the walls and around the ill-fitting door. 2 horses were tied outside, which meant the meeting was already underway. Gideon led Elena to the back of the cabin, where the wall faced away from the door and the shadows were deepest. They crouched beneath a window, pressing close to the rough wood, and listened. Voices filtered through the gaps, 2 men speaking in low, urgent tones. The first voice was cultured, almost gentle. "Dr. Garrett, the situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated. The girl escaped jail. Sheriff Hayes will be looking for her everywhere." "Let him look." The second voice was rougher-edged with pain. "Nathaniel, by morning she'll be dealt with, and Hayes will find evidence that she killed Maylin before fleeing. Case closed. You're certain we can plant the evidence convincingly?" "I'm certain. I've done it before. That's how we framed Marcus's death, as an accident, remember? A few strategic bruises, the right placement of the body, and suddenly natural causes become inevitable truth." There was a pause. Then Garrett spoke again, his voice troubled. "I'm concerned about your health, Nathaniel. You're getting weaker. If you collapse during one of these operations—" "I won't collapse. I refuse to." A cough, wet and painful. "I have 6 months, Samuel, maybe less. 6 months to secure enough money that Helena is taken care of after I'm gone. 6 months to build something that will outlast me. Helena despises you. You beat her for years. Why would you care what happens to her? Because she's my wife." Nathaniel's voice was almost confused, as if he himself did not understand his own motivations. "And because I destroyed her life. The least I can do is make sure she's financially secure when I'm dead." Guilt is a strange motivator for a man in your position. Not guilt, practicality. If Helena has money, she won't talk. If she's desperate, she might go to the authorities out of spite. Elena felt Gideon tense beside her, his breathing quickening with barely controlled rage. She reached out and touched his arm in warning. They needed to hear more, needed irrefutable evidence before they could act. Inside the cabin, Dr. Garrett was speaking again. "What about the other problem, the witness who's been asking questions at the boarding house?" "Dealt with. She'll be in Sacramento by tomorrow, working in a gentleman's club. One of our buyers there specializes in women with fight in them, gets a premium price for the challenge. And the shipment coming in next week. 5 women. 2 Chinese, 2 Mexican, 1 German. All fresh off the boat in San Francisco, all promised domestic work. We'll process them through the clinic as usual. You do the medical evaluations, I handle the transport and sales." The casual way they discussed human lives, the business-like tone applied to trafficking and murder, made Elena's hands shake with suppressed fury. These were not men driven by passion or madness. They were simply corrupt, motivated by profit, viewing women as commodities to be bought and sold. Gideon leaned close to her ear. "We have enough. Let's get back to town, get this to the authorities." But before they could move, disaster struck. Elena's boot caught on a root hidden beneath fallen leaves. She stumbled, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself against the cabin wall. The impact was soft, but in the night silence, it sounded like thunder. Inside the cabin, the conversation stopped abruptly. "Did you hear that?" Nathaniel's voice, sharp with suspicion. "Outside. The back wall." Footsteps, moving fast, the door slamming open. Gideon grabbed Elena's hand and they ran crashing through the underbrush, all attempt at stealth abandoned in favor of speed. Behind them, shouts, the crack of a gunshot, a bullet whining past Elena's head to splinter a tree trunk 2 feet away. They reached the horses, untying them with fumbling fingers, mounting in a chaos of tangled reins and panicked animals. Another gunshot, this one closer. Gideon's horse screamed and reared, but he kept his seat, bringing the animal under control through sheer will. They rode hard through the darkness, branches whipping at their faces, the forest a blur of shadows and danger. Behind them, the sound of pursuit. More gunshots, the thunder of hooves on frozen ground. Elena's horse stumbled on loose rock, and she nearly fell, clinging to the saddle with desperate strength. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred at the edges. But she kept going, kept moving, because stopping meant death. Gideon was ahead of her now, leading the way, back toward town, toward safety. She could see his silhouette against the slightly lighter sky where the trees thinned. And then she saw another rider cutting across their path from the left. Dr. Garrett taking a shortcut through the trees to cut them off. Someone who had been waiting in ambush. The rider pulled a rifle from his saddle and aimed at Gideon. Elena screamed a warning, pulling her own revolver, firing blindly in the rider's direction. The shots went wide, but it was enough to make the rider flinch, to throw off his aim. Gideon's horse leaped a fallen log and disappeared into deeper forest. Elena followed her mare's hooves, finding purchase on uncertain ground. The ambusher fired again, and this time Elena felt the bullet hit. Not her, but the horse. The animal screamed and went down, tumbling forward, throwing Elena from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her left side. She tried to stand to run, but her leg wouldn't support her weight. Broken or badly sprained, she couldn't tell. Footsteps approaching. Someone dismounting, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Elena fumbled for the revolver that had fallen from her hand. Her fingers closed around cold metal. She raised the gun, aiming at the figure silhouetted against the trees. "Don't." The voice was familiar. Dr. Garrett, breathing hard from the chase. "Put it down, Miss Mirovna, or I'll shoot your friend when he comes back for you. And he will come back. Men like Gideon can't help themselves." Elena kept the gun raised. "You're going to kill me anyway." "Eventually, but you can make it quick and painless. Or you can make me angry and I'll take my time. The choice is yours." Behind Dr. Garrett, another horse appeared. Nathaniel, looking pale and ill, even in the darkness, a gun in his hand. "Just shoot her and be done with it," Nathaniel said, his voice strained. "We don't have time for this." "I want to know what she heard," Garrett replied. "How much she knows. How much she's already told others. Does it matter she's a fugitive, a known criminal? No one will believe anything she says. I'm not taking chances, not after Marcus." They were arguing, distracted. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. If she could take out one of them, maybe Gideon could escape. Maybe Helena would get the evidence to the authorities. Maybe some good would come from this disaster. She fired. The shot went wild pain from her injured side, throwing off her aim. Dr. Garrett dove for cover. Nathaniel's horse reared, and then everything happened at once. Gideon burst from the trees on horseback, riding hard, firing his own revolver. One of his shots hit Nathaniel in the shoulder, spinning the older man around. Dr. Garrett fired back the bullet, catching Gideon's hat and sending it flying. Elena tried to stand to run, but her leg collapsed beneath her. She crawled instead, pulling herself behind a fallen log, using it as cover while bullets flew overhead. Dr. Garrett advanced on her position, reloading as he walked. His face was calm, professional, the same expression he probably wore when treating patients, as if killing Elena was just another medical procedure, necessary and routine. "You've been quite a lot of trouble," he said conversationally. "More trouble than you're worth, frankly." But Nathaniel insisted. Said we needed a scapegoat with the right background, someone whose guilt would be unquestionable. "Why tell me this?" Elena asked, buying time, her hands searching the ground for anything she could use as a weapon. "Because you're about to die. And I want you to understand why. Want you to know that every choice you made, every step you took, led you here to this moment. Your life, your death, all part of a larger plan you never saw coming." He raised the gun finger, tightening on the trigger. Elena's hand closed around a rock, but she knew it would be useless against a bullet. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. The shot never came. Instead, she heard a wet, choking sound. She opened her eyes to see Garrett stagger backward, a knife protruding from his chest. Helena's medical knife, the one Gideon had carried in the borrowed medical bag. Gideon stood 10 feet away, his throwing arm still extended, breathing hard. His face was set in an expression of cold determination that Elena had never seen before. Garrett looked down at the blade embedded in his sternum, his professional detachment cracking for the first time. He touched the handle with trembling fingers as if verifying it was real. "You," he said to Gideon, his voice already weakening as blood filled his lungs. "I taught you to throw a scalpel in the war, to hit a target at 20 paces. He coughed, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I made you into a surgeon, and you used my own lessons to kill me." "You made me into a lot of things," Gideon said, his voice hard. "But a murderer of innocent women was never one of them. That's all you, Samuel." Garrett's legs buckled. He sank to his knees in the snow, one hand still clutching the knife handle, but lacking the strength to pull it free. The other hand pressed against the ground, trying to hold himself upright. "Interesting," he murmured, his physician's mind still cataloging even his own death. "The blade. You angled it perfectly. Severed the aorta. I have maybe 2 minutes." He looked up at Gideon, and for the first time something like emotion crossed his face. Not remorse, not fear, but perhaps recognition. "You know what's funny?" Garrett's voice was fading, each word coming with visible effort. "I never thought of myself as evil, just practical. Those women were going to suffer anyway. I simply monetized their suffering, made something useful from inevitable pain. That's what every monster tells himself," Elena said from behind the log, "that what they do doesn't matter, that the victims were doomed already." Garrett's eyes found her, and he smiled, blood staining his teeth. "And what do you tell yourself about the 12 you burned alive, that they deserved it, that you had no choice?" He coughed again, more blood. "We're the same, you and I. We both killed in the name of justice. The only difference is I got paid." "No," Elena said firmly. "The difference is I have to live with what I did. You're about to die without ever feeling a moment of genuine regret." "Regret," Garrett repeated as if tasting the word. "Is that what separates the righteous from the damned? A little guilt?" He swayed, his strength failing. "Then I suppose I'm damned." His eyes glazed over, the light fading from them, even as his body remained upright for another few seconds. Then, like a puppet with cut strings, he collapsed face first into the snow, the knife still protruding from his back. The forest fell silent except for the wind through the pines and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Gideon stood frozen, staring at the body of his former mentor, the man who had taught him to save lives, now dead by his hand. Elena could see the weight of it settling onto his shoulders, the knowledge that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. "I killed him," Gideon said quietly, more to himself than to Elena. "I threw that knife meaning to kill him, and I did." "You saved my life," Elena replied, "and probably the lives of every woman he would have trafficked or murdered after this. Does that make it right?" "I don't know, but it makes it necessary." Gideon's hand was still extended, still frozen in the position from which he had thrown the knife. Slowly, as if waking from a dream, he lowered it to his side. "We need to go," he said, "before Nathaniel comes back, before anyone else dies." Gideon rushed to Elena. "Can you stand—" "My leg, I think it's broken. I'll carry you." He lifted her as gently as he could, but even his careful touch sent white-hot pain through her injured side. She bit back a scream. "Nathaniel," she gasped. "Wounded, fled toward town. We need to go before he gets reinforcements." He carried her to his horse, somehow managed to get both of them into the saddle, and turned the animal back toward Placerville. Behind them, Dr. Garrett's body lay motionless in the snow that had begun to fall, the first real storm of winter finally arriving. They had evidence now. The journal Helena had given them was still in Gideon's saddlebag. Garrett was dead, but Nathaniel lived and could be arrested and made to testify. They had won. except Elena could feel something wrong. Something beyond the pain in her leg, a warmth spreading across her side that had nothing to do with the cold night air. She looked down and saw blood, not from her leg, from her ribs where a bullet had creased her side during the chaos. She had been so focused on her leg that she hadn't noticed the second injury, hadn't felt it in the confusion and adrenaline. "Gideon," she said quietly, "I'm hit." She felt him tense. "How bad?" "I don't know, but there's a lot of blood." He urged the horse faster, racing now against time and blood loss. Elena tried to stay conscious, tried to focus on the rhythm of the horse's gait, the strength of Gideon's arms around her, anything but the growing cold that spread from her core outward. The lights of Placerville appeared through the trees, so close, almost there. "Stay with me," Gideon was saying. "Elena, stay with me. We're almost there. Helena will fix this. She's a good nurse, the best. You're going to be fine." But Elena could feel herself slipping away, the cold and the blood loss pulling her down into darkness. Her last coherent thought was that this was fitting somehow, that after running for 5 years, after burning 12 people alive, and living with that weight, dying in the snow with a good man trying to save her, was more than she deserved. Then consciousness faded, and there was only darkness and cold, and the distant sound of someone screaming her name. Pain was the first thing Elena became aware of. Not the sharp, immediate pain of injury, but something deeper, more insidious, a burning that spread through her entire left side like acid eating through flesh. She tried to open her eyes, but the effort seemed monumental. Her eyelids weighted with lead. Voices swirled around her, urgent and frightened. "I need more light. Hold the lamp closer." "She's lost too much blood. Helena, I don't think she's going to make it." "She will. She has to. Now give me the forceps and stop talking." "Helena." That was Helena's voice, sharp with command despite the tremor underneath. Elena tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but her mouth would not obey. Her tongue felt thick and useless. Hands on her body, probing, pressing, causing explosions of agony that made her want to scream, except she could not find her voice. Something cold touched her side metal against exposed skin. Then, a sensation she recognized from her nursing days, the peculiar feeling of having her own flesh cut open while conscious but unable to respond. The bullet went through clean, but it nicked the intercostal artery. "I need to clamp it before she bleeds out." More hands, more pain. Elena felt herself slipping away from consciousness, again felt the darkness rising to claim her. Part of her welcomed it. The darkness meant no more pain, no more running, no more carrying the weight of 12 deaths on her conscience. But another part, the part that had kept her alive through 5 years of hiding and fear, fought against the pull. She had not survived this long only to die on a table in a clinic in the middle of nowhere. Had not burned the traffickers in Philadelphia only to be defeated by their Western counterparts. She forced her eyes open. The room swam into blurry focus. She was in Helena's clinic, lying on the examination table. Helena stood over her with surgical instruments, her hands covered in blood, her face pale and drawn with concentration. Gideon held a lamp in one hand and gripped Elena's shoulder with the other, his expression caught between hope and despair. "She's awake," Gideon said. Helena did not look up from her work. "Elena, I need you to stay very still. I'm almost done, but if you move now, I could nick the artery again, and there'll be no stopping the bleeding." Elena tried to nod, but even that small movement sent fresh waves of pain through her torso. She focused instead on breathing, on staying conscious, on not screaming, as Helena's hands moved inside the wound. "There." Helena's voice carried relief mixed with exhaustion. "Artery is clamped. Now I just need to tie it off and close the incision." Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways Elena's fevered mind could not track. Minutes might have been hours, hours might have been minutes. She drifted in and out of awareness, occasionally surfacing to find Helena still working, Gideon still watching the lamp, still burning. At some point, the worst of the pain receded, replaced by a floating sensation that she recognized as laudanum. Helena must have given her something for the agony. The drug brought relief, but also confusion, memories bleeding into the present until Elena could not separate what was real from what was remembered. She was back in Philadelphia, The hospital basement, the smell of kerosene and medical alcohol mixing in a combustible cocktail. Her hands shaking as she poured the accelerant along the walls, knowing that what she was about to do could never be undone. "Are you certain?" The voice belonged to Catherine Morrison, the older nurse who had recruited Elena into the underground network that helped trafficked women escape. "Once you light that match, there's no going back. 12 people will die." 12 monsters, Elena had replied, her voice steadier than she felt. 12 men who have sold hundreds of women into slavery. Men who use the hospital as a cover to evaluate their merchandise. Men who will never be prosecuted because they're too wealthy, too connected, too protected by a system that doesn't care about immigrant women. The law still matters. We could try again to expose them through proper channels. We've tried for 2 years. No one listens. No one cares. Elena struck the match, watching the small flame dance in the darkness. This is the only language they understand. The only justice these women will ever see. She had thrown the match. Had watched the fire catch and spread with terrible beauty. Had walked out of the hospital through the front door while chaos erupted behind her. By the time anyone realized it was arson rather than accident, she was already on a train heading west. 12 men had died that night, but hundreds of women had been saved. The trafficking network in Philadelphia had collapsed without its leadership. Other cities had investigated their own hospitals, found similar corruption, made arrests. Elena had told herself it was worth it, that the arithmetic of suffering justified her actions. 12 deaths to save hundreds of lives. But in the dark hours before dawn, when sleep would not come and the memories pressed close, she wondered if she had become the very thing she fought against. A person who decided who deserved to live and who deserved to die. A person who took justice into her own hands because the law had failed. "Elena," Gideon's voice pulled her back to the present. "You're talking in your sleep. About Philadelphia. About the fire." Elena realized she must have been speaking aloud, her laudanum-addled mind unable to keep her secrets locked away. She tried to focus on Gideon's face to see if what she had revealed had changed how he looked at her. But his expression held only concern. No judgment, no condemnation. Just a deep weariness that matched her own. "I heard what you said," Gideon continued quietly, "about the 12 men, about why you did it. Are you going to turn me in?" Elena's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "No." Gideon glanced at Helena, who had finished closing the wound and was now cleaning her instruments with methodical precision. "Helena and I have been talking while you were unconscious. About what to do. About what happens next. What did you decide? That depends on you, on what you want." Before Elena could respond, a sound from outside made all 3 of them freeze. Horses. Multiple riders approaching fast. Gideon moved to the window and peered through the curtain, then swore under his breath. "It's Sheriff Hayes, and he's got at least 10 men with him." Helena's hands stilled on the instruments. "He knows we're here. Someone must have seen us bring Elena back. Or Nathaniel told him." Gideon's jaw tightened. "My brother is wounded but still mobile. He'd use any advantage to save himself." "We need to hide her," Helena said. "There's nowhere to hide." "Hayes will search the whole building." Gideon turned from the window. "We have to tell him the truth. About Nathaniel and Garrett. Show him the journal. Make him understand." Elena tried to sit up, but the movement sent such intense pain through her side that her vision went white. She collapsed back onto the table, breathing in shallow gasps. "You can't move," Helena said firmly. "The stitches are fresh. If you tear them, you'll bleed out before I can repair the damage." "Then I'll talk to him from here." Elena's voice was weak but determined. "I won't let you and Gideon take the fall for protecting me." Heavy boots on the front steps. A fist pounding on the door. Sheriff Hayes's voice, loud and authoritative. "Mrs. Cross, open up. This is official business." Helena wiped her bloody hands on her apron and went to the door. She opened it just wide enough to speak through, keeping her body blocking the entrance. "Sheriff, it's very late for a house call. I'm looking for an escaped prisoner, Elena Mirovna. We have reason to believe she's here." "She is here, but she's not under arrest anymore." Hayes's eyebrows rose. "That's not your decision to make, ma'am. It is when the real criminals are dead or dying." Helena stepped aside and gestured toward the examination room. Come see for yourself, but leave your men outside. My clinic is not a barracks." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded to his deputies to wait. He entered alone, his hand resting on his revolver, his eyes scanning the room for threats. When he saw Elena on the table, pale and blood-stained, his expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "What the hell happened here?" "Dr. Samuel Garrett tried to kill us," Gideon said bluntly. "He's dead now, shot while attempting murder. His body is about 3 miles northeast near an old mining cabin." Hayes turned slowly to face Gideon. "Samuel Garrett, the town physician. You're telling me he tried to kill you? Not just us. He's been killing immigrant women for months, trafficking the ones who survived, working with my brother Nathaniel to run a network that stretched from San Francisco to Sacramento." The sheriff's face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that came before explosive anger or violent action. "Those are serious accusations, Cross. You better have proof." Helena moved to her desk and retrieved the leather journal she had shown Elena and Gideon earlier. She handed it to Hayes without a word. The sheriff opened it and began to read. His expression changed as he turned the pages, moving from skepticism to horror to cold fury. When he finally looked up, his eyes had hardened into something dangerous. "Where did you get this?" "From Dr. Garrett's private files. I've been his assistant for 2 years. I know his handwriting. I know his codes. Everything in that journal is real." Hayes closed the journal carefully, as if it might explode if handled roughly. "If this is genuine, if even half of what's written here is true, then we've had a monster operating in our town for years, and no one noticed." "People noticed," Elena said from the table. Her voice was weak but clear. "The women who disappeared noticed. Their families noticed. But no one with power cared enough to investigate." The sheriff flinched as if struck. "You're right. And that's on me. I should have pushed harder, should have questioned the convenient explanations." He looked at each of them in turn. "Tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So they told him. Gideon spoke about Marcus Dalton's investigation and suspicious death. Helena described the letters she had been forced to write the women who had come through the clinic, never to be seen again. Elena explained about being lured to Placerville as a scapegoat, about the false witness placing her at Maylin's murder scene. When they finished, Hayes sat in silence for a long moment, processing the enormity of what he had heard. "Nathaniel Cross," he said finally, "where is he now?" "Wounded. I shot him in the shoulder during the fight at the cabin, but he was still mobile when he fled." "Then he's dangerous. A cornered animal." Hayes stood and moved toward the door. "I'll organize a search party, every man in town if necessary. We'll find him before he can hurt anyone else or escape." "Sheriff?" Elena's voice stopped him. "There's something else you need to know. About me. About Philadelphia." Hayes turned back. "I know about Philadelphia, Miss Mirovna. The fire. The deaths. I received a telegram yesterday from the marshal's office back east. They've been looking for you for 5 years. Elena felt her heart sink. So it was over. Even if she survived her injuries, she would be sent back to face trial for arson and murder. All of this, the running and hiding and fighting, had been for nothing. However, Hayes continued, the marshal also sent some additional information. Seems there's been new developments in that case. Evidence that the fire might not have been as simple as originally believed. Questions about whether the victims were themselves involved in criminal activity. He pulled a folded telegram from his pocket and handed it to Gideon. "Read it to her. I think she deserves to hear it." Gideon unfolded the paper and read aloud. Investigation into Philadelphia hospital fire ongoing. New witness testimony suggests deceased were operating trafficking network. Request information on Elena Mirovna's whereabouts for questioning, not arrest. She may be witness rather than suspect. The words hung in the air like a miracle Elena had not dared hope for. Not forgiveness, not exoneration, but the possibility that the truth might finally be heard, that the narrative of that night could be something other than simple murder. "I don't understand," Elena whispered. "Who came forward? Who testified?" "Someone named Catherine Morrison," Hayes said. "A nurse who worked with you. She apparently kept quiet for 5 years out of fear, but when she heard you were being hunted as a fugitive, she decided the truth mattered more than her safety." To Catherine, the older nurse who had helped Elena plan everything, who had stood as witness to the reasons even if she had not struck the match herself. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected grace of someone speaking for her when she could not speak for herself. "So what happens now?" Gideon asked. "Now we deal with the immediate crisis. Find Nathaniel, secure the evidence, get Miss Mirovna stable enough to travel." Hayes moved toward the door again. "After that we'll sort out the legal complications, but for tonight you're all under my protection. Anyone comes for you, they'll have to go through me and every deputy I can muster." He left, calling orders to his men outside. Elena heard the sounds of horses departing the search for Nathaniel beginning. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. "Sleep," Helena said gently. "You need rest to heal. I'll watch over you." But sleep brought no peace. Elena's dreams were fevered and fragmented memories of Philadelphia mixing with recent violence. She saw the hospital burning, saw the 12 men trapped inside their faces pressing against windows that would not open. She saw Maylin's body in the snow, saw Dr. Garrett falling with a knife in his ribs, saw Nathaniel's twisted smile as he discussed selling women like livestock. And woven through it all a question that would not leave her alone. Had she become the thing she fought? Was there any real difference between killing the traffickers in Philadelphia and what Nathaniel and Garrett had done? Both claimed justification. Both believed their actions served a greater purpose. The only difference Elena could find was in the arithmetic of suffering. She had killed to save. They had killed for profit. But did the motive matter if the result was the same? Death was death regardless of the reasons behind it. She woke to daylight streaming through the clinic windows and voices speaking in urgent tones nearby. Gideon and Helena arguing about something. Elena turned her head carefully, mindful of her stitches, and saw them standing by the door. "You can't be serious," Gideon was saying. "After everything he's done, you want to help him. He's dying, Gideon, and he's still my husband, no matter how much I wish he wasn't." Helena's voice was strained. "I took an oath as a nurse, first do no harm. That includes not letting people die when I have the ability to save them. Nathaniel has harmed plenty of people. He's forfeited any right to compassion. Maybe, but I haven't forfeited my obligation to provide care." Helena paused. "And there's something else, something practical. If Nathaniel dies now before he can testify, Garrett's journal might not be enough. A good lawyer could argue it's fabricated, that the trafficking network is a fiction we invented to cover our own crimes. So you want to keep him alive to use against him?" "I want to keep him alive because it's my job. Using his testimony is just a convenient side benefit." Before Gideon could respond, a sound from outside made them both go silent. A horse moving slowly, the rider struggling to stay mounted. Helena rushed to the window and looked out, then gasped, "It's Nathaniel! He's here!" Gideon moved to stand beside her. Elena could not see from her position on the table, but she heard the front door open, heard the heavy, uneven footsteps of someone badly injured trying to walk. Nathaniel Cross appeared in the doorway to the examination room. He looked like a corpse that had not yet realized it was dead. His face was gray beneath the tan, his clothes soaked with blood from the shoulder wound that had never stopped bleeding. He swayed on his feet, one hand pressed against the doorframe for support, the other holding a revolver that shook with tremors. "Helena," he said, his voice a ruined whisper, "I need help." "Put down the gun." Gideon said, his own weapon already drawn and aimed. "Put it down, or I'll finish what I started in the forest." "Can't." Nathaniel's laugh was wet and painful. "Drop the gun and I've got nothing to bargain with, nothing to keep you from killing me where I stand." "You think we need a reason not to kill you after what you've done? I think you're too much like our father, too bound by rules and honor." Nathaniel's eyes found Elena on the table. "But she knows what I know, that sometimes the only way to get justice is to become the executioner yourself." Elena met his gaze steadily, despite the pain radiating through her torso. She saw in his eyes the same certainty she had felt in Philadelphia, the same conviction that the ends justified the means, that some people deserved to die, that playing God was acceptable when the alternative was letting evil flourish. And she saw how that certainty had corroded him from the inside out, how it had turned him into the very monster he claimed to be fighting, How the permission he had given himself to kill in the name of justice had metastasized into permission to kill for profit, for convenience, for nothing more than the exercise of power. "You're wrong," Elena said quietly. "We're nothing alike." "No." Nathaniel's smile was ghastly. "You burned 12 men alive. I've killed 4 women. By body count alone, you're the bigger monster. The difference is regret. I carry those 12 deaths with me every day. They haunt me. I question whether I did the right thing, whether there might have been another way." Elena's voice strengthened despite her weakness. "But you sleep soundly. You justify and rationalize and never once question whether you might be wrong. That's what separates justice from murder, not the act itself, but what comes after." Nathaniel's expression flickered, something like doubt crossing his face before hardening again into resolve. "Pretty words from a dying woman, but words don't change facts. You're a killer, I'm a killer, we're both damned." "Maybe," Elena agreed, "but I'm trying to be better than what I've done. You're just trying to profit from it." The revolver in Nathaniel's hand wavered, then steadied, pointing now directly at Elena. "Garrett's dead. The journal is evidence against me, and you 3 are witnesses who can testify about the network. Seems to me the smart play is to eliminate the problem before Sheriff Hayes gets back." "You can't kill all 3 of us before we kill you," Gideon said. "Don't need to kill all 3, just need to kill her." Nathaniel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Without Miss Mirovna, the case gets murky, just my word against yours. And I've got friends in high places, people who owe me favors, people who would rather see this whole thing buried than exposed." "You're bluffing," Helena said, but her voice shook with uncertainty. "Am I—" Nathaniel coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I've got maybe an hour before I bleed out, maybe less. What have I got to lose by taking her with me?" The moment stretched taut, as wire, everyone frozen in position. Nathaniel's gun aimed at Elena, Gideon's gun aimed at Nathaniel. Helena standing between them, hands raised as if she could physically stop what was about to happen. Elena knew she should be afraid, should be fighting for her life with whatever strength remained, but instead she felt a strange calm settle over her. If this was how it ended, shot by a dying man in a clinic far from home, at least she would die knowing she had tried to stop the network. That her final act had been one of resistance rather than flight. She thought about Catherine Morrison, who had finally found the courage to speak the truth. About the women who had been saved because the Philadelphia network had been destroyed. About May Lynn and the other victims here in Placerville who deserved justice even if they could not speak for themselves. And she thought about Gideon, who had protected her when he had no reason to trust her. About Helena, who had risked everything to help strangers. About Sheriff Hayes, who had chosen to believe the unbelievable because the evidence demanded it. If she died now, she would die knowing that good people existed, that the world was not entirely corrupt, that sometimes, despite all the cruelty and suffering, there were still those willing to fight for what was right. "Do it then," Elena said to Nathaniel. "Pull the trigger, but know that killing me changes nothing. The truth is already out. The network is already exposed. My death would just be one more crime added to your list." Nathaniel's hand trembled. For a moment Elena thought he might actually fire, might end her life in this sterile room with these 2 witnesses watching. But then something changed in his expression. The certainty crumbled, replaced by something that might have been despair. "I'm so tired," he said softly. "So goddamn tired of all of it." The gun lowered slowly until it pointed at the floor. Nathaniel swayed his legs, buckling. Helena moved fast, catching him before he could fall, easing him down into a chair with surprising gentleness, given the circumstances. "Gideon, get my medical bag," she ordered. "I need to look at that shoulder wound." "You're really going to treat him?" Gideon's voice was incredulous. "After everything, I'm really going to treat him? Because that's what I do, and because we need him alive." Helena was already unbuttoning Nathaniel's blood-soaked shirt, her hands moving with professional efficiency. Despite the tremor, Helena could see running through them. You can hate someone and still save their life. The 2 aren't mutually exclusive. Gideon retrieved the medical bag, but his expression remained conflicted. He watched as Helena examined the gunshot wound, cleaning away blood to assess the damage beneath. "The bullet went through clean," Helena said after a moment. "But you've been bleeding for hours. You need a transfusion, or you're not going to make it." "Then let me die." Nathaniel's voice was distant, already half gone. "Better than hanging for what I've done." "You don't get to choose the easy way out," Elena said from the table. "You're going to live. You're going to testify. You're going to face every woman whose life you destroyed and account for what you did. Why do you care I tried to kill you? Because you're right about one thing. We are alike, you and I. We both crossed lines that should never be crossed. The difference is I'm willing to face the consequences, and you should too." Nathaniel laughed bitterly. "Consequences. As if justice actually exists. As if anything we do actually matters in the end. It matters to the women you sold. It matters to the families of the ones you killed. It matters to everyone who's ever been victimized by people like you who think power gives them the right to destroy lives." Before Nathaniel could respond, the sound of horses returning filled the street outside. Voices calling orders. Sheriff Hayes had come back. The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Hayes and his deputies secured Nathaniel, placing him under arrest despite his injuries. Elena worked to stabilize both her patients, moving between Elena and Nathaniel with grim determination, treating wounds without regard for guilt or innocence. 2 doctors were summoned from neighboring towns, one to assist with Nathaniel's care and ensure he survived to stand trial, the other to provide a second opinion on Elena's condition. Both confirmed what Helena already knew. Elena would live, though recovery would be long and painful. Nathaniel might survive if he received proper medical care, though his underlying cancer meant he had months at most. As dawn broke over Placerville, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sheriff Hayes sat with Elena in the clinic while Helena finally allowed herself to rest in the next room. "I've sent telegrams to Sacramento and San Francisco," Hayes said. "Federal marshals will be here by tomorrow to take charge of the investigation. This is bigger than anything a small-town sheriff can handle." "What about Nathaniel's connections?" "The people he mentioned, who owe him favors, we'll root them out. Every name in that journal, every associate, every buyer. This ends now." Hayes paused. "And as for you, Miss Mirovna, I've been in contact with the authorities in Philadelphia. They want you to return for questioning, but they've made it clear you're not being charged with any crime at this time. The investigation is ongoing." "Will they charge me eventually?" "I don't know. That's above my pay grade." Hayes stood and moved to the window, looking out at the town beginning to wake to a new day. "What I do know is that you helped stop a trafficking network that's been operating for years. You risked your life to expose corruption that went deeper than anyone realized. That should count for something. It doesn't erase what I did in Philadelphia. No, but maybe it balances the scales a bit, shows you're trying to do right even when it's hard." He turned back to face her. "For what it's worth, I think you're a good person who's been forced to make impossible choices. The world isn't black and white. Sometimes the only options are different shades of wrong, and we do the best we can." After the sheriff left, Elena lay alone in the quiet clinic watching dust motes dance in the morning sunlight. Her body ached. Her future was uncertain, but for the first time in 5 years, she felt something that might have been peace. Gideon appeared in the doorway an hour later, carrying a cup of coffee and looking like he had not slept at all. "Helena finally passed out from exhaustion," he said, settling into the chair beside Elena's bed. "I told her I'd watch over you while she rests. You should rest too." "Can't. Too much adrenaline still in my system." He sipped the coffee, staring at nothing. "My brother is going to die, either from the cancer or from hanging, and I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that." Elena reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, marked by years of hard work. "You're allowed to grieve. Even for someone who did terrible things, he's still your brother. I keep thinking about when we were children. Before the war changed him, he was kind then, used to protect me from bullies, used to read to me when I was sick." Gideon's voice broke slightly. "I don't know when he became the monster, or if maybe he always was one, and I just didn't want to see it. People aren't born monsters. They're made, by trauma, by choices, by circumstances that push them past their breaking point." Elena squeezed his hand gently. "Your brother made his choices, but that doesn't mean the person he used to be never existed. You're allowed to mourn that person while condemning what he became." They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, sharing the weight of impossible grief. Outside, Placerville was waking to news of Dr. Garrett's death and Nathaniel Cross's arrest. By evening, the whole town would know about the trafficking network, the murders, the conspiracy that had operated beneath the surface of their community. Some would refuse to believe it. Others would claim they had suspected all along. A few would ask the hard questions about how such evil could flourish unnoticed, about what it said about a society that looked away from suffering as long as it happened to people deemed unimportant. But for now, in this quiet moment, there was just Elena and Gideon, and the fragile connection forged between two broken people who had somehow found each other in the chaos. "What will you do?" Gideon asked eventually. "When you're healed enough to travel, go back to Philadelphia, face whatever consequences are waiting, try to tell the truth about what happened, and hope someone listens." And after that, Elena had not thought that far ahead, had not allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. But now, with Gideon's hand warm in hers and morning light spilling through the window, she found herself considering possibilities. "I don't know," she admitted. "For 5 years I've only thought about the next day, the next hiding place, the next identity. I haven't let myself think about actually living instead of just surviving. Maybe it's time to start. Maybe." Elena turned to look at him fully. "What about you? What happens to the ranch?" "It belonged to Marcus. His will left it to a cousin back east, but I've been in contact with the executor. They're willing to sell it to me at a fair price. So I suppose I'll stay. Try to build something good on land that's seen too much suffering." "That sounds like a worthy goal." "It does, doesn't it?" Gideon smiled, the expression transforming his tired face into something almost hopeful. "And maybe, if you find yourself back this way after you've settled things in Philadelphia, there'd be a place for you here, if you wanted it." The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Elena felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Very much." The moment was interrupted by Helena appearing in the doorway, looking slightly more rested, but still exhausted. "How's our patient?" she asked, moving to check Elena's vital signs with professional detachment. "Alive, healing, thinking about the future." "Good. That's a healthy sign." Helena finished her examination and stepped back. "You're going to have a scar. A bad one, but you'll live." "I'm familiar with scars." "I suppose you are." Helena managed a small smile. "For what it's worth, thank you. For stopping Nathaniel and Garrett. For giving me the courage to finally stand up and tell the truth. I've been complicit in their crimes through my silence. I'll have to live with that. But at least now I can try to make amends." "We all have things we need to make amends for," Elena said. "The question is whether we let our past define us or whether we work to become better than what we've done." Over the next 2 weeks, Elena slowly regained her strength. The federal marshals arrived and took over the investigation, arresting 3 additional men in Placerville who had been part of the trafficking network. Nathaniel was moved to a secure facility in Sacramento where he could receive medical care while awaiting trial. Letters came from Philadelphia. Catherine Morrison had indeed testified about the trafficking network at the hospital, providing evidence that corroborated Elena's story. The district attorney's office was reviewing the case but seemed inclined toward treating Elena as a witness rather than a suspect. There was talk of a full investigation into the fire, of potentially charging the surviving members of the trafficking ring with conspiracy to commit murder. It was not freedom, not quite. But it was the possibility of redemption, and that was more than Elena had dared hope for. On a cold morning in late November, with the first real snow of winter falling soft and silent outside, Elena prepared to leave Placerville. Her wounds had healed enough to travel, though she still moved stiffly and could not raise her left arm above shoulder height. The federal marshals had arranged for her transport back to Philadelphia, where she would give testimony and face whatever judgment awaited. Gideon helped her into the wagon that would take her to the train station, his hands gentle on her waist. Helena stood on the clinic steps, wrapped in a shawl, watching with eyes that held both sadness and hope. 2 years, Gideon said quietly. "Maybe less if things go well, but I'll be here when you get back. You can't promise that. You don't know what's going to happen in Philadelphia. I don't need to know, I just need to have faith." He pressed something into her hand, a small wooden carving of a bird in flight, delicate and beautiful. I made this for you, to remember that even caged birds can eventually find their way to freedom. Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Thank you for everything, for believing me, for protecting me, for showing me that not all men are monsters. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are miles apart, and that doing right is worth the cost even when the cost is high. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, words insufficient to express the depth of what they felt. Then Elena climbed into the wagon and Gideon stepped back, watching as she rode away through the falling snow. She did not look back, could not bear to. Looking back meant acknowledging what she was leaving behind, and she needed all her strength to face what lay ahead. The trial in Philadelphia lasted 3 months. Catherine Morrison testified. Elena testified. Evidence was presented about the trafficking network, about the 12 men who had died in the fire, about the hundreds of women who had been saved as a result. In the end, the jury acquitted Elena of murder, but convicted her of arson. The judge, acknowledging the extenuating circumstances, sentenced her to 2 years in prison. It was light, all things considered. Fair, perhaps, given the complexity of the situation. Elena served her time in a women's facility outside Philadelphia, working in the prison library and teaching other inmates to read. She received letters from Gideon every week, simple notes about life on the ranch, about the changing seasons, about small moments of beauty in an often ugly world. And she wrote back telling him about the books she was reading, about the women she was helping, about the slow process of forgiving herself for the choices she had made. 23 months after leaving Placerville, Elena Mirovna stepped off a train and back onto California soil. It was spring, the mountains green with new-growth wildflowers painting the hillsides in brilliant colors. Gideon waited at the station, older grayer, marked by time but still unmistakably himself. When he saw her, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. They did not run to each other, did not embrace dramatically like characters in a romantic novel. They simply walked toward each other with measured steps, closing the distance that had separated them for 2 years. When they were close enough to touch, Gideon took her hands in his. "Welcome home," he said. The ranch looked different than Elena remembered, or perhaps she was the one who had changed. The house had been painted, the corrals expanded, new horses grazed in the pasture, their coats glossy in the spring sunshine. "Helena helped me fix the place up," Gideon explained as they rode toward the house. "She sold the clinic in town, moved out here last year, said she couldn't stand being in that building anymore after everything that happened." "How is she?" "Better. Still healing, but better. She's been teaching some of the ranch hands to read and write. Says everyone deserves an education regardless of their station." The front door opened before they reached it. Helena emerged older and thinner, but with a peace in her face that had been absent before. She smiled when she saw Elena. "Welcome back," Helena said, embracing her. "We've been counting the days." Over dinner that night, they talked about the past 2 years, about Nathaniel, who had died in custody, 6 months into his imprisonment, the cancer finally claiming him. About the trafficking network that had been dismantled, dozens of men arrested across 3 states. About the women who had been freed and the ones who had not survived. "Marcus would be proud," Gideon said quietly, "of all of us, for finishing what he started." Later, when Helena had retired to her room and the house had grown quiet, Elena and Gideon sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge over the mountains. "I don't know how to do this," Elena admitted. "How to be normal. How to live a life that isn't about running or hiding or fighting." "Neither do I," Gideon said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together." He took her hand, and Elena felt the calluses earned through 2 years of hard work, the strength that came from enduring and surviving. She thought about Philadelphia, about the fire, about the long road that had led her here. She had paid for her crimes, had faced the consequences of her choices. But more than that, she had learned that redemption was not a destination but a journey, that becoming better than what you had done required constant effort, constant choice, constant commitment to doing right, even when it was hard. "I want to help," Elena said. Women like the ones Nathaniel and Garrett trafficked. I want to create something here, a safe place, somewhere they can heal. Gideon smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. There's plenty of room on this ranch. Plenty of work for willing hands, and Helena has connections with organizations back east that help immigrant women. They sat in comfortable silence as night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new opportunities to choose right over easy. But for tonight, Elena allowed herself simply to be present, to feel the cool mountain air on her face, to hear the distant call of owls in the forest, to hold the hand of a good man who had chosen to believe in her when belief was the hardest thing to give. She had come to Placerville as a fugitive, a woman with nothing to lose and everything to hide. She was leaving that version of herself behind. In its place stood Elena Mirovna, scarred but whole, guilty but forgiven, determined to build something good from the ashes of her past. And for the first time in more years than she could count, that felt like enough. Elena looked at his face, at the mountains rising behind him, at the vast sky stretching overhead, and she realized he was right. This was home. Not the place she had been born, not the city she had fled, but here with this man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. I'm home, she agreed. They walked together toward the waiting wagon, toward the ranch, toward a future neither could have imagined when they first met. Behind them, the train pulled away from the station, carrying other passengers to other destinations, other lives. But Elena's journey, the long flight from Philadelphia, through 5 years of hiding and fear, had finally ended. Not with fanfare or triumph, but with something quieter and more profound. With the simple grace of coming home to a place where she was known and loved, despite her scars, despite her past, despite everything she had done and everything she had failed to do. The last letter, the one that had lured her to Placerville and set all of this in motion, had been destroyed long ago. But in its place were new letters, honest words between two people learning to build something real from the wreckage of their pasts. And that, Elena thought as the wagon carried them toward the ranch, was the only kind of redemption that truly mattered. Not forgiveness from judges or juries or society, but the quiet acceptance of someone who knew your worst secrets and chose to stand beside you anyway. The snow had melted, spring had come, and for the first time in more years than she could count, Elena Mirovna allowed herself to hope that better days lay ahead. The end.